real wine drinker, but I always default to white. I love white wine.
And I like reds a lot, but it's hot today. And so, and then when I'm done with this, I'm going to do like a self-recording. I sell wine retail online. And so I want to do YouTube videos for all of the wines. So it's going to take a long time for me to do it. But I'm doing this one tonight. It's actually like artisan Sauvignon Blanc from Italy, but it's really good. It's called Zorzatig. It's really good. So I'm going to do a video about that. And so, but if I can, after I'm about halfway through, I think the video will be more fun.
Where is it from in Italy?
It's from Piemonte.
Oh, cool. Amazing.
Yeah.
And Tisha, what are you drinking? What's your white wine?
I am drinking Montclaris. I had my wine class last night. So it is Albarino, which is, it is from Rye Spice. And it's really interesting because most Albarinos are not high in acid. They're kind of, low in alcohol and medium. This one is very racy, very high in acid. Apparently their grapes are kept in parcels. That's how they ferment their grapes in parcels right along the Atlantic Ocean. So it was very interesting to learn more about. I wrote on my notes from yesterday's class, but it's really, really interesting, like how it's grown, how the producer has grown the grapes. And I've never had an Albarino like this before.
Cool.
Well, I need to try that one because it's not a variety that I like.
I love Albarino, but it's biodynamic as well. So it's unfiltered.
We kind of lost you a little bit, Tisha. I don't know what happened with
the
volume. Maybe it's just
now
me.
we can hear you.
Yeah,
now
we can hear you now. Yeah, it kind of faded out.
No, it's unfined and unfiltered.
That's amazing. You're going in and out for some reason, but it does sound delicious. I think afterwards everyone should chat the names of these wines because
We'll do that.
I would love to know what this Albarino is. It sounds amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read your bio, Bianca, because I want to be official. So tonight we have author Bianca Bosker, who is an award-winning journalist, ex-cellarette, and author of the New York Times bestseller Cork Dork, which was a New York Times Critics Pick winner of the MFK Fisher Award for Excellence in Culinary Writing and finalist for the William Saroyan Prize on Nonfiction. In addition to serving as a contributing writer at The Atlantic, Bosker has written for publications such as The New Yorker, The New York Times, Food and Wine, The Guardian, and Roads and Kingdoms. Her writing has been anthologized in the Best American Travel Writing, and she has served as a contributor to Milk Street Radio and Prince Street Podcast. Her lesser-known exploits include training alongside butlers in Chengdu and pairing wines with takeout on Instagram. She lives in New York City. So without further ado, I welcome our author and our newest friend, Bianca Bosker. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm now here. It's such a pleasure. I mean, as I don't know, of course, if you can relate, but for me, it's just, I feel like I'm not getting to spend a lot of time with a lot of people. So it's really nice to be here with,
Yeah. So I was telling Tisha before you came on, I found your, I think I was in an airport a few years ago and, just looking for something to read because it's going to be a lengthy flight. And I saw the book. And so, of course, I'm interested in wine. I've been in the wine industry since 2005. So I was like, hey, let's read this. And I found it to be so real, so personal, grueling at times. I could feel your pain, even though I've never worked as a cellarette or in a restaurant that had, an amazing wine list. I owned a restaurant for a short period that was on a boat. And so because it was on a boat, we did everything in a box. So we had every variety of black box there is. But I'm just,
That's amazing.
I was excited. And so I was telling Tisha also that I hadn't finished it. And so then I downloaded it on Audible. And I love the books on Audible where the author actually reads the book, because I feel like you're talking to me and you're sharing your story.
Yeah, me too. It was so much fun to read the audiobook as well, because I felt like, first of all, I got to read it the way that I always read it in my head when I was writing it, and because when you're writing, you're always reading your text. But also I got to do voices, and that was really fun. Get to kind of, the best advice, the only advice I really got on recording the audiobook was from a veteran radio producer who said, read it like you're reading to children. And I thought that was very helpful. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for reading the book, and thank you for listening to the book. It means a lot to me. And the fact that it resonated with you, given your own deep experience in the wine and restaurant world, also, that really also especially means a lot.
And I think I'm glad you said, you read it like you're reading to children, because I think a lot of times in the wine industry, and you kind of touched on it in the book, that the language, it's a whole nother language. Like wine speak, is another language. And sometimes just that alone intimidates people, and they don't want to be involved in the wine thing. And that's why when they're looking at complex wine menus, they pick exactly what they know. If you recognize Chardonnay, you pick Chardonnay, because it can be way over the top and too intimidating.
Yeah, and I don't know how much, Tisha and Latasha know about my background before this, but I was not in any way a sommelier before I started on the journey that became Cork Dork. I can't even say I was, like I drank wine. I don't know if I would even call myself a wine fan. I mean, it was, I don't know. I mean, I sort of knew there was maybe a difference between wine from a bottle and a box, but that was about as sophisticated as it got. I couldn't begin to tell you about the difference. I'm pretty sure I thought Bordeaux was a type of grape, right? Rather than a wine, very famous wine region in France. And so I came to this world from as a bit of an outsider, or a civilian, as my sommelier mentors described me. And it was really motivated by sort of the whole kind of realization started with discovering this world of cork dorks, these people who really rearranged their life around wine and around these physical senses of taste and smell. And, I was working as a tech editor at HuffPost at the time, so completely different, very digital existence, all screens. And so this idea of kind of cultivating your senses rather than, ignoring them, which is what I did before then, was so compelling. But also the journey really started from this question of, what is the big deal about wine? Like, why do people spend all this time and money over this thing that, if we're being honest, I think we can be honest here, at the end of the day, it turns into pee, right? It is expensive pee. And, of course, there's a very enjoyable experience, I now know, before then, but, it was at the time totally nonsensical to me. And I think that, I think the wine world I found it intimidating. And I think you're right that the language can be just totally bizarre. I mean, don't get me started on minerality. Don't get me started on this idea that when you know something about wine, you have to describe a wet thing as being dry. I mean, that is a word. I mean, if you, I'm sure right? It's endlessly confusing for people. And it actually makes sense why it would be endlessly confusing for people. I, as part of the book, did actually dive into the whole language around wine, and also sort of dug up the history of tasting notes. And I found it so interesting, because tasting notes feel just so embedded in wine culture, right? This whole idea of, oh, it smells like, actually it smells really good. But, smelling like, what does this wine smell like? Like white flowers. There's like a little bit of peach in there. It's amazing. But then you go all the way off to be like, well, it's pencil shavings. It's sort of like a well-constructed dress. Or one of my least favorite ones, for Condria, is a guy who described it, a very famous wine writer, described the archetype of Viognier from Condria in France as smelling, tasting like a farmer's wife has just come back from the orchard and bitten into a peach and it's pouring over her open breast or something, and like, I don't know what
too
that is.
much.
So yeah, it's too much. And I think, so tasting notes, anyway, they're actually very new. They were invented in the 70s by this scientist, Anne Noble, who basically wanted to get away from this very this very subjective language of talking about wines as being honest or feminine or holding, to the blood of their clan or being, these things that were muscular, right? Things that just didn't mean a whole lot, that were really, just subjective. And so anyway, she came up with this idea, this whole vocabulary that we now use of describing wines in terms of, things you can find at a supermarket, vegetables, fruits, even Fruit Loops. And unfortunately, since then, that was in the 70s, we have yet again gone in the direction of these pretty, ridiculous tasting notes, which I get. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I have definitely told people that wines taste like, something made by your cool uncle that goes to Burning Man. I mean, that doesn't tell you anything about, I think it tells you a little bit about the wine, but I will admit it's a little out there. So
it is a lot. And I remember the first time, what kind of got me into wine was the difference. Like I ordered a Riesling at a restaurant, and my server, he really knew wine well. And so we ordered this Riesling, and then I tried to buy one by myself, and I bought a dry Riesling. So I was like, how the hell is this so different? This wasn't what I had at the restaurant. But I remember the first time a wine rep. So my dive into wine was opening 2 wine shops. So I had commercial rent and payroll, and I knew nothing about wine. So it's like got figured out real fast. And so I remember when he described a wine, it was a Sauvignon Blanc. And so typical, he said cat pee and gooseberry. Never had a cat. I never had a gooseberry.
Cat pee.
Stayed 15 years later. And so it just like, okay, I want to, my customers are, working class, just regular people who enjoy wine. I don't want them confused because you never had a cat and you grew up in a very urban, working class community like me, and we don't have gooseberries in our backyard, So I approach it saying that, it's just the language is totally different and complicated.
Well, I think, first of all, and it's funny, I mean, even the people, though, that use the words don't always know what they're talking about. Like, I remember interviewing a wine, a critic, someone that reviewed wines for a living, and one of the favorite words among wine reviewers is quince, right? I mean, like the way that wine reviewers talk about quince, you'd think it was, just everyone was eating quince all the time. It was just like, you grab like an apple, you grab a quince. But he actually said, I use it and I actually have no idea what it smells like. He was like, I've never had a quince in my life. And if you haven't had a quince, it's sort of like if you mated a pear and an apple, I would say. But, I do think that there is a, I think for too long, there's been a tendency to sort of tell people what to taste when it comes to wine rather than teaching people how to taste. And for me, I was very frustrated because, people would always say, well, taste is subjective, wine is subjective, you like what you like. And that's true, but that doesn't mean that you can't develop like a toolkit. And I think that a lot of us never do that, right? We want to learn something about wine, and rather than like teaching ourselves to smell things in a glass of wine or taste things in a glass of wine, which we can do. We don't have to be born with these super senses. We just start by reading wine reviews or memorizing wine regions. And I think that the result is a problem that goes even beyond wine, which is what I would describe as we sort of settle for secondhand sensing, right? Where things are delicious because they're expensive, or we waited, a couple weeks to get a reservation at that restaurant, or, someone told us that this wine was like 92 points. And I think that there's really kind of learning how to taste for yourself is a much more solid foundation for a relationship with wine. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of kind of, you know, the way that I think there's been sort of like people trying to hold on to knowledge because it is sort of beneficial. If you're the critic or you're, you know, the elite kind of person with this knowledge, then people have to turn to you rather than sort of trusting themselves. And I will say that this process of learning how to embrace these kind of forgotten senses of taste and smell is so fun. It's wonderful. And I think it, you know, pays dividends even beyond a glass of wine. You know, I think that there's, you know, kind of first of all, I should say that most of us don't do that, right? A lot of us, we grow up and, you know, I know for me at least, it's like we learn that the grass is green, we learn that the cow goes moo, but we don't really learn to put words on on smells, for example, on tastes. And actually we can kind of blame Plato and Aristotle for that. They decided early on that taste and smell were not to be trusted. They were the base senses. And we've really believed that ever since. We have this idea that humans are bad smellers. And in fact, we beat dogs when it comes to some odors, rats as well. And it really begins, I'm sure, Benita, you've gone over this, you know, before, but, you know, when we talk about, I don't know, is it Marcia that joined us? Hi, Marcia.
Yes.
Hi, Rita. Mel. Yeah. I don't know if you all have a glass of wine as well, but I know Tisha and Benita and I have our glasses of wine. And I will say that, you know, oh, good, great. So, you know, when we go through the kind of 4 steps involved in, hi Mel, in kind of analyzing a glass of wine, you know, you have the visual inspection of the wine, you have the, you know, smell, or the nasal inspection. I don't know what is the word I'm looking for, but, you know, you smell the wine, you know, you drink it, you put it in your mouth, you inspect it on the palate, and then you kind of the 4th step is to sort of decide what it is or whether you like it. But that 2nd step, that, you know, the aromatics of it, I think so many of us, we see a liquid and we're like, well, I am supposed to put it in my mouth. That is what I do with it. And in fact, you know, we can distinguish. Okay, so does everyone know how many basic tastes do we have?
Oh, a whole bunch. According to your book.
So how many basic tastes can we perceive?
4. I don't know.
5.
5. Okay.
Close. Very close. Yeah, I'll give it to you.
Okay.
So we have sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. And how many aromas, like how many different aromas can we perceive? Marcia, very good. Scientists think that we can perceive around 1 trillion different odors. I'll give it to you. But basically what I guess the point there is that, you know, when we talk about the nuance of wine, it's in the smell, right? That step of really taking the time to smell the wine. So much of the complexity exists in the aromas. And I don't know about you all, but before, you know, I started on this journey that became Cork Dork, I would stick my nose in a glass of wine, and on a really good day, I could tell you that I was smelling wine. Like that was it. Yeah. And, you know, the way that we get better and build and you know, cultivate this kind of these aromatic skills is really by building our sense memory. And that can start by, as a master perfumer advised me to do, just describing the smell of every aroma we encounter over the course of the day. So, you know, smelling your shampoo in the morning, smelling, you know, the black pepper you put on your food at night, like describing the smell of your toothpaste. I mean, all of these things, language is really important to cement those aromas in our heads. And then that eventually will, you know, smell a strawberry. You're never going to smell strawberry in a wine if you don't smell strawberry and strawberry. And it's so much fun. There's, I think, so much beauty that I noticed that I didn't before, and so much information. You know, when you go outside, like pick some grass, like crumple a leaf. You know, we talk about wines that smell like dirt. Smell dirt, taste dirt. I mean, I've licked rocks. I've
tasted dirt.
It's helpful.
I have tasted the dirt, because like when you talk about wine, you know, it's like the sun, the dirt, and the water. And so you do have to kind of taste the dirt. So I've eaten dirt at vineyards before.
Lick a rock.
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah.
So I want to talk about the journey and how you were received by your family and your friends when you said, "Hey, I'm going to be a cellarette." You know, that doesn't sound sexy.
And it's not. It was, I think that they thought I had lost my mind. It was a big change. It was a big surprise. Nothing had prepared them for it. Nothing had prepared me for it. And I think, I quit my job with these grand aspirations that I would, start in a 2 Michelin star restaurant and work my way up to a 3 Michelin star restaurant from there, which was utterly delusional. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. I quickly discovered that I was, the sommelier saw me as a civilian. I had no business being on the restaurant floor, being in their tasting groups, all the things I wanted to do and really needed to do to train. And so I had to start at the very bottom as a cellarette. And so, I think that the reception was, among sommeliers, I think I was very lucky, as you can probably tell from the fact that I'm just like so excited to be talking with you all. I think the wonderful thing about the wine world is that there are so many people who are very excited to share this passion, right? As you know, and I'm a good case study in this. Once you get people started talking about wine. If they love wine, they won't stop. And so I was lucky to, find people. I would say fine. I was lucky to badger persistently and annoyingly people into taking me under their wing. And that is still oftentimes, the way that it works in the wine world. It is, becoming a sommelier is still very much kind of an apprenticeship system. There's not a school that you go to for it necessarily. But it could be hard. I mean, I remember I write about this in the book, but I remember, I finally got into this amazing tasting group run by aspiring master sommeliers. And, I remember getting someone accidentally CCing me on an email talking about how like annoying I was or how bad I was at tasting. And, that didn't feel great, but, it's okay. I mean, it's whatever. I still got to taste with them. So they didn't kick me out. But it's, it's an interesting world. It has its demons as well. But I think it's, hopefully changing. Already, it's evolving. And I think, I was lucky to be a part of it.
So I want to say that you're very brave to do that.
Thank you. That's very
of course, to quit your job and to delve into the wine world. And, I know from experience that sometimes, we see it and that grass appears to be greener, until you go over the other side of the fence and you're in here and you're working. And because you were in New York, which is kind of a restaurant mecca, and so you had the opportunity to work in places that had like serious wine lists and they had serious wine patrons. And so that adds another level of pressure to what you were doing.
Certainly. And I think a lot of people actually move to, the sommeliers I spoke to would move to New York. They had great jobs in other parts of the country or even the world, but New York has, you can just go to a place on the corner block and drink a wine from Lebanon next to a wine from Slovenia, next to a wine from Georgia. It's pretty spectacular. And you're right, there's some heavy hitters. There's some big whales going out into these restaurants. I did finally, so I set out to try and pass the Court of Master Sommeliers Certified Sommelier exam, which is sort of the gold standard for somms, trying to work the floor, but not the only way. You don't have to have a credential. And as part of that, there's like a blind tasting section of the exam, there's a theory section of the exam, and there's a service section of the exam. And as part of trying to master the 15 steps involved in properly opening a bottle of red wine, I did what a lot of sommeliers do, which was a stage or a shadow at finally a 2 Michelin star restaurant. And it was an experience that just, I'll never eat out the same way again. I think it was, just the way that, like, you go to a restaurant, you think you're reviewing them. No. They are reviewing you and analyzing you way more than you can imagine. I mean, Googling guests beforehand,
that was the part of the book that just had me floored, that guests make reservations. These folks are being Googled to kind of determine, can you afford these wines, or, kind of what, I mean, I was laughing, but it kind of had me floored. That's serious. So I guess if like somebody like a me that you really don't know, you might go to my website and say she knows like this much about wine, we'll let her in. But if some heavy hitter with real dollars, with a black card, my reservation can be bumped. Or you come at 5:00 when no serious person comes to dinner.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I think it's weird. I mean, there is there's all this shorthand too in terms of those. So there's these little paper tickets that get printed as soon as a table is seated, that sort of explains the importance to the restaurant or the history. So you have, the wine PXs who are, personnes extraordinaires. You have the PPXs, which is, personnes particulièrement extraordinaires. You have, I love these ones too, HWC, which is handle with care, SOE, which is sense of entitlement, which of course you don't get in New York ever.
Wow.
But I think, I think that on the one hand, I think it can appear mercenary, but I think there's also another way in which, it is this sort of like, it's a theater. It's the theater of fine dining. It's the kind of, trying to sort of, elevate it from being this ingestion of calories to this experience, to this moment where everything feels like it's right with the world. And, in some senses, knowing a little bit more about the guests can perhaps help with that. But I think that, the sommeliers also play the long game. They're gonna, if you ask for a $50 bottle of wine, they're not going to direct you to a $500 bottle of wine. They know better than that.
So it's interesting that, we're talking about the New York scene, because I just feel like if you're trying to be a master sommelier, certainly you have to go through a New York, or you have to go through maybe an LA, but I think even New York is probably bigger than an LA when it comes to the restaurant scene. So what do you think? I had a conversation with a friend. She's in the industry. She more the journalism side. And so we had a conversation recently about the trajectory to become a master sommelier. Do you think that you can actually, and I know anything is possible, a lot of studying, a lot of note cards, a lot of tasting wine, but can you become a master sommelier, like coming from a wine shop?
So I think that so for those who aren't familiar, I don't know if everyone is, but the Court of Master Sommelier system, which is, there's a few different certification tracks that exist in the wine world. There's also the Master of Wine, which I would compare to like getting a master's in economics versus the kind of Court of Master Sommeliers, Master Sommelier, certification, diploma, whatever you want to call it, is sort of more like an MBA. One is like a little bit more, like the Master of Wine is something that like a lot of critics and writers sort of pursue, whereas people that want to become master sommeliers more often or not like are working the floor in the restaurant. And within the Court of Master Sommeliers, you have many different levels. You have, the kind of intro level, you have the certified level, you have the advanced level, and you have the master level. And the master level, there's, I don't remember the exact statistic, but there's fewer than 300 of them in the world. It is notoriously,
I think it's like 232 or something. It's a handful.
Yeah, it is incredibly difficult. It is, there was recently a kind of cheating scandal that, rocked a lot of people's confidence in the system and in the exam. But it has been this really, it has been and continues to be a really coveted title, and one that if you achieve it, and that's a big if, I mean, people, people spend a decade trying to pass and still don't pass. And it's expensive. I mean, thousands upon thousands and thousands of dollars applying, to say nothing of, the thousands and thousands of flashcards and hours that go into preparing it. So I will say that there's, I did not go after the Master Sommelier diploma. I was, I passed the certified exam. They get exponentially harder as you go from the certified to the advanced to the master. So I don't have my own firsthand experience with it, but I would say that, there is also like the WSET system, which is a little bit more, like that
more human. I mean,
yeah,
I think that,
there's
that's
more structure.
real.
There's more structure. Like it really helps, you sit down, you taste through wines with a class. I don't know if you've gone through it. I think it's a little dry, but you come out of it with good wine knowledge. Whereas the court system is much more, like you've got to kind of learn it on your own, again, through apprenticeships and all of that kind of thing.
I think into the court system, it's like the instructors they're already there, or feel like they're already there. And so it's not welcoming.
No.
That was my experience. It's not very welcoming. So you get it or you don't. And if you don't, bye,
Well, I think what's also really interesting is I wrote about, so I took my exam in Virginia Beach, and I was lucky enough to befriend, we met over the internet, and she very kindly picked me up, from the airport, and I got into a stranger I'd met over the internet's car, which I guess we do all the time now with Uber, but still it was wonderful. It was woman, Annie, who had worked in restaurants and hospitality for a long time, and had been trying to pass the court system for a long time. And, that experience and seeing it from her eyes, I do think that there's, I write about this in the book, but the court is also kind of training people for a standard that exists in a relatively small number of restaurants. I remember we had to memorize all these cuvées of champagne that are hundreds of dollars, and most people that are working in restaurants are not selling wines that are worth hundreds of dollars.
Right.
And you have to learn the kind of tasting notes for them and the prestige and why they're so good without ever having trying them. And call me a skeptic, but I think there's something a little dubious, going back to what we were maybe talking about at the beginning of, just sort of saying like, trust me, this is good, right? Like, take my word for it. And again, just instead of telling people what to taste, like, let's all learn how to taste. Let's do it for ourselves. Let's think for ourselves. And, start, I don't know, having, I think there's so many good things that come out of it. I think it's, we don't all have to like California Cabernet Sauvignon. That's not what I personally, I'm drinking at the moment, but, and we don't have to be all drinking these same cuvée champagnes, nor can we.
So I like, one thing you talked about in your book, I think, I don't know, like chapter 8 or 9, you kind of talked about, we learn, you guys learn all of this stuff, but in this country, we're still, rocking the barefoots and the yellowtail. I mean, because those things are still the leading wine brands that are flying off the shelves, so as you mentioned, the court, the knowledge is great, but everyday people who we're trying to introduce to wine, that's not what they're drinking.
Yeah, well, there's, I think that I wrote when Cork Dork came out, I wrote a story in the New York Times that was sort of like a defense of quote unquote bad wines. And as part of the research of the book, I got really interested in this question, or part of the research as I was, training and everything, got very interested in this question of what made for a good wine. And, I was learning to taste Sauvignon Blanc from, Italy, like what you're drinking, right, from a Sauvignon Blanc, from California, learning to tell the difference in kind of type. But I didn't feel like I was really learning what made for a good wine versus a great wine versus a bad wine. And so I started asking my sommelier mentors, and the answer I got was pretty much verbatim, why can't there be some goddamn mystery left in the world? I didn't really get a clear answer. So then I started asking other people. I talked to wine critics. I looked at, the kind of, is there something about the chemistry of wine? I talked to wine economists. I talked to, that kind of looked at the aging laws at places. And I found that there was no real consensus on what made for a good wine. But there did seem to be consensus in the wine world on what made for a bad wine. And so that took me to a winery in California that would be considered by a lot of Cork Dorks to be a producer of bad wine. And it was an interesting experience because it made me realize that, first of all, how a lot of these less expensive wines are sort of designed, right? There's all these different additives that we can add to wines to nudge their flavors, their smells, their colors, their textures, and different aromas. And no one talks about it. You don't have to disclose that you've put these things into the wine, but a lot of people do it. And it's not only in expensive wines, it also happens in very expensive wines. But I found that, to me, I think that there's kind of there's a bias, right, to say that these wines are not complex, that they've been messed around with additives. And to me, I think, some of us will have our epiphany with, Benita, did you say for you, was this a Riesling? Is that right? I mean, some of us will have our wine epiphany with like an incredible Riesling or an old Bordeaux, but some of us might have our wine epiphany with a Barefoot or a Yellowtail. And I think that, these can be gateway wines. They can be the thing that intrigues you to try something else. And so I think that they have a place. I don't know. I mean, I also think that there's some of these additives have also, I would argue, kind of democratized a quality wine. And, to your point about New York being a very different sort of place, not all cities have, incredible, selection of $17 wines from Croatia, right? Or I think that there's, I don't know. I just think that there's, we can disagree about what makes for a good wine, but that's also what makes it interesting. And I think that this judgment, this idea, if you drink what, some wine critic deems to be a bad wine, you're a bad person, is a ridiculous thing. It's so silly. So
it is. It's all about what you like. I definitely agree with that. And there's so many wines out there. At our virtual tasting Tuesday, just a couple of days ago, we did a Pinot Noir from Bulgaria.
Ooh, that sounds so cool.
Great. It was really good. Tastes a lot like Pinot Noirs from Willamette. I mean, it was really good.
Wow.
And, very affordable. I think retail for maybe $16, $17, but from just a small vineyard in Bulgaria.
You gotta send that on the chat. I want that name too.
I'll put it down. So certainly, I like, what you're saying in terms, like, we do know, and we've talked about this with my groups, just a lot of the manipulative things that can be done with wine. I talk a lot about it with my son. He's vegan, and so, he's particular about everything, and he's a new wine drinker. He turned 21 during COVID, so we haven't even had a chance to go to a bar. So he just drinks what's here, but just talk about, because he's vegan, he cares a lot about what's in it. So just talking about some of the gelatin and the chips and even like sawdust. I mean, just some of the stuff done to manipulate wine.
I mean, I think that there's we've always manipulated wine, right? I mean, go back to Bordeaux, and people were, for centuries now, they've been adding, egg whites to the wine. They've been, we've added things. I think the Romans or the Greeks added lead to their wine as a sweetener, which was obviously disastrous.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if that's what you're drawn to, I think that's fine. But I also think that, to your point, it's something that people don't talk about, but I think it's important to be aware of the fact that this goes on, right? That it's not just, wine is not necessarily just grapes and yeast and love, right? That there's, sometimes liquid oak tannins that get thrown into the mix.
Right. It was something else I wanted to ask you. All right, so anybody else have questions? Because I know it's like 7:45, and so I don't want to dominate the conversation, even though y'all know I can. Anybody else have questions for Bianca? I'll unmute you if you need to be unmuted, but you can unmute yourselves, I think.
Yeah. Anything that you all have enjoyed recently that you can recommend? Like this red wine from Bulgaria sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm putting that in the chat right now.
Yes, and my wine class. This was, I don't know if you'll be able to find this. This is Rouge de Lossart. You can see it.
Ooh,
It's from
Type it
Monte.
in the chat. Because I can't,
Okay,
I can't see it well enough to spell it.
They're indigenous grapes from Italy. This bottle only costs, I bought this, this is a barrel thief for those of us that live in Richmond. It's a wine store here, Bianca. This retails for, I think, $19. This is very much worth a $50+ bottle of wine.
And what's the wine shop, Tisha? Because you're kind of going in and out.
Barrel Thief.
Oh, yeah,
You've been
I
to
know
Barrel
Barrel
Thief
Thief.
before?
I know it. Mm-hmm.
It's in the chat along with the other one, the Albarino.
yeah.
Really great wines in our wine class. I'm actually in WSET level 3.
Oh, great.
So,
amazing.
So, right. So when you were talking about descriptors, I'm a big I hate these descriptors in this thing that they give you because I don't smell hay. I don't know what in God's name. I don't know what the hell barnyard is. Really? What's forest floor? Have you been to the forest and smelled the floor of the forest? No. So it's like, what bourbon-nosed man in Britain has made these words? I have no idea. So
I'm telling you, barnyard is distinctive. If you had a Malbec from Cahors.
Yes, barnyard. That's true. We were talking about BO yesterday, but I need to make up a teacher version of lexicon because I have my own lexicon in class. Because it's just dried herbs. Just say dried herbs. We'll be fine.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think what's also interesting is these tasting notes are so, they are a bit arbitrary, right? Like I as part of my research, I went to China and I was teaching some wine classes in China and judging a wine competition. And it was interesting because, blueberry, for example, isn't really part of the wine tasting lexicon in China. On the other hand, this wonderful winemaker that was sitting next to me during the judging kept referring to smoked duck neck in the wine, right? And so, like, that's his reference. And I think you're totally right. Like it's basically whatever his name is from Downton Abbey, came up with the barnyard. And also, this is another one. Petrol, like sommeliers, a Riesling, the classic tasting note is petrol. Riesling. Just say gasoline. Just say gasoline. Yeah. It's not like we live in the United States. It's called gasoline. But I think
if it smells like cat pee, it smells like cat pee.
Right.
Right.
Totally.
Because when I first had the
boxwood. She said boxwood.
Yeah, I know what boxwood
apparently
is.
Boxwood smells like cat pee. So
interesting. I didn't know that. I'll have to go find some boxwood and
Yeah, because I did the first time I had Riesling. I said this smells like Vaseline. Because Vaseline is petroleum jelly. So I did smell that. So
I love that. That is such a good one.
Because I know Vaseline. I got babies.
Right.
That's great. I love it. You should come up with a different. Yeah, totally.
A whole new language, a practical everyday wine language. For anybody who ever lived in America.
I I don't know what I need to do, but I need to create one.
Yeah, totally. Well, you should, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was gonna say that some of them, what I found really interesting is that some of them do have a scientific basis to them. And so like Sauvignon Blanc, Benita, you're drinking a Sauvignon Blanc, right? So, one of the classic descriptors is green bell pepper. And actually, if you look at the chemical composition of green bell peppers and Sauvignon Blanc grapes, they both contain pyrazines. And so that idea that there's maybe this, there is, some of them have a kind of more kind of evidence-based kind of commonality in the tasting notes, or Syrah, right? We often say Syrah tastes like black pepper. Syrah grapes and black pepper both contain rotundone. So some of them, but yeah, again, mineral, I don't know, charcoal, like some of these things, wet rock, I mean, I don't know.
Wet slate.
Yeah, wet slate, yes. But, right, I mean, like let's have, how many of us have, another one, peppered black raspberry or something was another one a master sommelier used when at a tasting. And I was like, what is that? And he was like, I don't know.
That?
He just made it up,
Something that the rest of us can't do,
Right, which is also, I think we all have our own personal way of recognizing wine. For me, Chenin Blanc is a wet sheep holding a pineapple. That is my association.
I love that.
I've never smelled an actual wet sheep holding a pineapple, but that is what I associate it with. And, I think that that's also different. It's just different though, if you're trying, because I think that sometimes using these terminology that this, if you don't smell that barnyard, then you assume that, either you're broken or the wine is. And I think to go back to where we started, that's not a whole lot of fun. But yeah. Marcia, Mel, any favorite tasting notes? Rita, Latasha?
I'm a novice when it comes to wines.
Well,
but
welcome.
I do love, I've learned through Benita that I really enjoy Chardonnays.
Oh, nice. Me too.
And I like the color of like a golden Chardonnay and that buttery taste. So I do pay attention to that. And I guess a heavy aroma.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what to equate it with, but that's what I like.
Yeah, I think that's a good description. It's like, it is, I know what you mean, right? It's, it's like, I think some Chardonnays, it's like this cloud of perfume in some ways, right? It's, but I think a heavy aroma, there's something, yeah. I don't know if I could.
Like a rich aroma.
Like a bowl of popcorn.
I don't care exactly, and I don't care how much it costs, but if it has that color and that kind of body, I tend to enjoy that.
That's great. It's amazing. I feel like you might enjoy also white wines from the Rhone in France that have like Marsanne, Roussanne, Viogniers. They also, for me, like they're like springtime in a glass. They have that like. But on the other hand, if you're enjoying it, don't fix what's not broken. I guess
buttery, like popcorny taste though. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. Now. Not to put you on the spot. You don't have to tell us.
Put her on the spot. I'm going to unmute her. You're unmuted, Melody.
Oh, I didn't need to be unmuted. I'm trying to pay attention and trying to close a bond deal at the same time. But
okay, no. That's okay.
But for me, I think I have found this newfound love for Zinfandels for some reason.
It's great.
I love that boldness. A little bit of I think a little bit of French oak to round it a little bit, but I have just fallen in love with them. I just want to try them everywhere.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Someone once told me that like one of the tasting note, like if you're in a blind tasting, one of the tells for that you're smelling Zinfandel is peach yogurt. So keep a nose out for that. I've noticed it. Sometimes you get it and it's just unmistakably peach yogurt.
Okay, I'm going to do that. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down.
So Rita is in a place. Rita's texting me. She's in a place that is kind of loud, so she's muted. But Rita's a red wine drinker for the most part. So, we spend a lot of time. She's a very good friend, a great mentor. But we spend a lot of time. We've emptied a lot of red wine bottles together because that's what friends do. more like Pinot Noir or maybe like a Syrah. She's kind of there. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's
and
great.
Tasha she's busy too. But you know, we do a lot of wine tasting together. So we recently ordered 2 bottles of a Zen from Lodi. And
cool.
you know, and so we kind of do our tasting notes, and so we're waiting on we're gonna order cab next week from that particular winemaker, and we're gonna have that winemaker on at the end of the month.
Oh, so fun. That's great.
So yeah, so this whole COVID, you know, isn't stopping the wine drinking. You know, we're probably doing
enhancing
it. We're probably doing more. You know, and I'm just happy that during, you know, the COVID is what kind of made me reach out to you, Bianca. You know, my job ended on the 27th of March, and I kind of looked over and I was like, okay, what am I going to do for my wine folks? And I saw the book, Cork Dork. And I was like, I'm going to find this lady and see if she'll talk to us.
I'm so glad you did.
Yes, I am so glad that you responded because I love the book. And
Thank you.
those of us who haven't read the book, I'm sure they will. And they'll love it as much as me. And if you can get it on Audible, I'm telling you, listening to Bianca walk us through her journey is way more fun than reading it in our own voice. So.
I'm sure you do a great job reading it as well, but that's very kind of you. And I'm so glad you reached out. And I'm really honored that, and just grateful that all of you joined and are here. And I hope I haven't totally talked your ears off, but hopefully you had a good glass of wine. So, you know, you could.
Yeah, I'm almost halfway through and I still got to do a video, so.
Okay, great. Well, it's going to be, I can't wait to see this video. But I'm sure you have lots of practice. But, well, no, I remember also when I was doing the Cork Dork book tour, and I would go and all these radio interviews, everyone would be like, you know, what'd be really fun is if we had you drink wine during the interview. And then I'd be totally just, you know, trying to sound really intelligent on the radio and you're drinking. I just would lose my mind.
Forget it. We did. I used to have a podcast and we were it was an hour about wine. And by it was started at 3, by 3:15, you know, if you didn't learn anything in the first 15 minutes, you weren't going to learn anything. So it was a lot of fun. And I listened to Andre Mack. He did his book, 99 Bottles. I listened to his Audible. And at the end, they did like a separate interview and they were drinking his wine out of it was his Oregon, you know, one of his top Pinots.
Yeah.
And they were drinking it out of coffee mugs, you know.
Oh do what you gotta do.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day and be well. And
we appreciate you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you as well. And yeah, keep up I look forward to hearing more of your good tasting notes and seeing some of your wines.
Well, I'm like a stalker, so once I meet you, you're my new best friend.
Oh, good. I can't wait. Likewise.
All right, Bianca, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everybody.
Thank you
for coming and joining. So we'll be talking to you soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right, y'all. Y'all be good.
All right. Thanks, Benita.
See ya.
Bye.